journalism is about people, and we are all participants. I mean, the journalists are participants, but the audience is also a participant and not like a passive consumer. I think we need to change how we look at that. And for that, I think automation can help.
Hello and welcome to Value from AI, where we explore the latest advances in AI technology for digital publishers, speaking with experts from both the business world and the technical space to give a full view on everything you need to know when it comes to personalization, recommender systems, and other AI tools. My name is Thomas Steisel, VP Sales and Marketing at Froomle, and today we'll be talking with Cecilia Campbell, Chief Marketing Officer at United Robots. She is a journalist and expert in the digital transformation of news and media with 20 years of experience in the industry. Welcome, Cecilia.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Nice to be here.
It is a real pleasure to have you for this episode live from Sweden, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Malmö. Yep.
Tell us, how has 2023 been like so far out there?
A bit crazy with the whole discussion around ChatGPT. It's sort of the AI discussion is like just exploding right now. And of course, we've been in this space for almost 10 years. So I've heard a lot of it before, but a lot of it is also new, and it's making life interesting, I would say. I'm
sure. Yeah. What an end of 2022 for you with all this frenzy about ChatGPT all of a sudden. And I guess a lot of questions coming to you, right? Given your position in the industry.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, all of our clients and prospective clients, everybody's asking, what are you doing with this? How is it going to affect us? And I'm sure we'll come back to this later on in our discussion. This the attitude to how technology affects you rather than what you do with it, which I think is the right way around.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, very interesting. And yeah, maybe before we get started, can you tell us more about your role at United Robots and how your experience led you to work with them as an introduction?
Yeah, so I'm, as you say, I'm a journalist, and I've been working in this industry since the late 90s. I was with One IFRA as a consultant for the most part of that. We had groups around how the mobile platforms what that would mean to news. And then we had a group around reader revenues for since 2011. So quite early, we were talking reader revenues. So I've been kind of part of the digital transformation of the media industry. And I guess that's how my CEO at United Robots kind of found me online somewhere. And because they were starting to internationalize, United Robots was founded in Sweden. But after a couple of years, it was obvious that there were opportunities in new countries. So I had a big international network of contacts, and had lived in England and the US. So yeah, here I am, a marketeer.
Right. Well, amazing. And I'm sure that this experience will allow us to have a very interesting conversation today about journalism and AI. So for today's episode, we want to onboard on a journey back in time, and specifically looking at the adoption of AI in newsrooms, as you said.
Yeah.
I think we've seen through the latest launches of ChatGPT and all these other generative AI tools, how emotional this can be to professionals in the news industry. And typically we're talking about two main emotions, and I hope you share that perspective. It's always about curiosity, right? So being very curious on how this works and what it can do for us. But also resistance and fear also sometimes. And I think that both at Froomle and at United Robots, with our respective AI technologies, we share a similar experience in dealing with curiosity and resistance. But I'm just wondering, how do you see this resistance evolving the last 10 years, for example? Do you see it's always coming back, or do you see people are getting more and more used to work with AI tools?
I mean, yeah, for sure. More people are used to it, but I think the discussion is still very much along the same lines. It's just wider now. So many more people are aware of it. But we've heard this, for a long time, ever since we started, especially, are the robots going to steal the journalists' jobs? Is it going to be, can we trust them? Is the language going to be repetitive and robotic? Is it going to be incorrect and or is it going to be factual? And I think when you go back to what you're saying, enthusiasm versus fear, it is a very black or white kind of discussion. Is the technology a savior or an enemy? And of course, the technology is just the technology. This is what I'm trying to say, that it's whatever you do with it. But there is definitely this fear about it taking over somehow. But I believe very strongly publishers are in control and you can do something good about it. And of course, I would say the aspect of it that I can understand is that there is this fear of losing control editorially somehow, that the robots are going to do things that are beyond the newsroom control. But again, it's all about how you implement it. So yeah, I think we need to take a step back and stop thinking that the robots have a mind of their own, because really they don't, you know. That's the thing to keep in mind.
No, that's very interesting. And so you're talking about control, and it's actually very interesting because let's take the example of content creation, right? You can always decide to ask a robot to write all of your content or just part of your content catalog, right? And it's the same for personalization. You could ask a robot to personalize the entire experience or just part of it. And what we see is that actually there's no reason to always look at the extreme usage of a technology. And actually you can see this technology more as a co-pilot to help you in some areas very specifically. So how do you help publishers you're working with selecting the right amount of control or giving the right amount of freedom to the AI tool versus the manual?
I mean, I think for us, it's been, I'll say, first of all, well, there are a couple of things. We work mainly with local media now. That's because that's where we found that our content adds the most value, but also to say that our technology is based on structured data. So it's not like the ChatGPT or the generative AI, where all the texts are based on everything that's been written before. It is actually, all the texts are based on structured data sets. So if it's in the data, it ends up in the text. Nothing else ends up in the text, you know. So you have that control as a publisher, that you know what it's going to do. But also I think to the other point of like flooding your site with automated content, you don't want to do that. And we would never advise that, you know, because, and I'm sure it's been tried, but then you end up with something that's not readers will not engage with it. You need, journalism is about people, ultimately. So this is something that can support the journalistic offering, if you like, and the values around the journalism. But we have actually stopped calling it robot journalism, which we did early days, just to quickly explain what it was we were doing. And now this is much more about just added community information that, you know, journalists are way overqualified to do, and also you wouldn't have the manual resources to do. You know, let reporters do, and robots can do it quickly and easily, and it's you know, not high level text or anything, but it's stuff that, you know, people look for information, and that's what it's about. Absolutely. In our case. But it's interesting also what you say about the personalization, because there was definitely discussion about that, especially a couple of years ago. I feel like, oh, if everything is personalized, we end up with these bubbles of people just get more of what they like, and you don't get that serendipity around discovering news, right? Absolutely. And it's often about words, right? So you say, for example, changing the word robot journalism was important for you. And actually, we're seeing the same with personalization. Actually, personalization is not the best term we could use to define our technology. Because it's not always about personalizing. It's about optimizing and making sure you propose content in the most optimal way, taking into account, of course, your editorial guidelines, right? So we're also kind of shifting. It's not only about personalizing the entire experience. It's about helping you to define the editorial rules you want to have, and having a tool that can, let's say, understand these rules and then act dynamically.
based on every user. So it's really more positioning it more as a co-pilot, understanding your needs and then dynamically executing them versus a robot coming and then changing everything all of a sudden.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is what we and with our technology, if you become a client of ours, and we don't sell, I should say that we don't sell the tech, we actually sell the content that the tech produces. So you can just plug it into your CMS. But I mean, before people push the publish button, there's a whole period of robot training, that goes on. To your point, with the editorial guidelines, they come into play. What kind of language do we want? All of that is controlled before anything automatically goes out on the site. So yeah, there are no autonomous robots running around at all.
Mm-hmm. And given your previous experience as a journalist, and also now when talking about the importance of words we're using, how do you typically go against these misconceptions around AI? Like how do you typically explain to your customers or prospects that AI is not a devil and that AI is there to help them? And yeah, how do you fight against these misconceptions?
Well, if you talk about the language specifically, with our tech, the language is very basic because you don't want anything to stick out really, because you're going to have such a big volume of let's say, match reports, that if you start using very floral language or interesting adjectives, it's going to they'll come up every now and again because they're in the system. So we try and keep it very plain. And of course, with the generative AI, you have no control over that. So anything can happen. And probably they can generate very interesting language, but then you have the issue of the fact checking and all of that. You have no control over what comes out really.
I see.
So for us, I mean, with our tech, you have the predictability of knowing this is going to be safe, it's going to be correct. You can even, you get text variations from the same data set. So you could have one text which talks about the game from the home team's point of view and one from the away teams. And you can control that within the system. So it's very much, and then of course, what we try to get people to do is try it out, test it, small scale, and see what happens. But there is still a little bit of resistance. But I have to say now, I mean, it's an interesting thing, 6 or 7 years ago when we started out, we would normally end up talking to some tech fanatic in the corner, right? Who really wanted to test out this, interesting new tool. And it would normally fall flat on its face because if there was no buy-in internally, that was not going to go anywhere. Today, we are generally talking with, audience people, engagement, content, product, quite high up senior management who are doing this because they have actually understood that it can fill a need in their business. So you have to start with the problem, don't start with the tech. That's another very common thing that is it's not tech for the sake of tech. It's tech for the sake of solving a problem, right?
Absolutely. And so talking about this resistance, can you think of a textbook example of a project where a customer was very resistant and then changed his mind maybe after seeing the first results? I'm sure all of your customers have that feeling, but can you think of an example where this resistance faded away after seeing results?
I mean, I don't have a specific case like that because I don't really talk about with the clients at that point, when they're onboarding. But we did do a survey a couple of years ago with journalists in Sweden we picked a few out, but 5 or 10 of them. And we asked them about how they felt about robots, and they were
before
saying
and after.
They had been skeptical, but they also now they kind of saw the point of it because their job had been made easier. They didn't have to go and do all the routine work that they had to do before, and also they were saying if people are worried about it, they're not worried about it because any publisher who kind of puts their whole business onto robots will not survive. They could see that both were, the journalism is one thing, and the added content is something else. And that, yeah.
I see. And when talking about having or solving a need, can you give us example on like what are typically the main objectives of a project with United Robots?
I mean, it could
do you feel like having these objectives very clear from the beginning, will this help having a successful use case and also again fighting these misconceptions?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one common thing, problem that we're helping solve is that a publisher is trying to maybe, I mean, we even have publishers start new sites in new geographies. You know, if they're a local publisher, they want to add adjacent areas. So they'll start a new title, they need more content. So they will start using automated content as sort of a base of updated stories about, you know, traffic updates or new house sales or new business registrations or sports. So it means that they can actually start growing and giving people in the local communities more, you know, more stories closer to home, basically. So that's one thing. If you just, you know, that's still kind of journalistic stuff, I guess, in a way. But sometimes it's just purely about, like McClatchy, for example, in the States, they had figured out that there were areas, topics where they saw the potential for growing new audiences, but they did not have the information to fill those gaps. And that's when they started looking at AI, not just for content automation, but for other aspects, other processes as well. So, you know, to do high school sports and house sales. And I think they were looking for restaurant reviews, which we don't do, but I'm sure somebody else did. So that could be one thing. And then for them, that it has also grown into, like, they've been able to launch new products. They have a residential newsletter, for example, where they combine reporter stories with very local house sales information for each of the, you know, the zip codes or whatever, where the subscribers are. So yeah, it could be different things like that. It's often about like filling local gaps in information.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Huh? So you're saying stories closer to home, and I'm actually connecting that opportunity with this entire story about news avoidance, right? So we know it's a big thing in the industry right now, and like it's difficult for publishers to see that people are actually overloaded with negative content in a way, and that they are entering this vibe of news avoidance. Yeah, but hearing you talking about like local stories, things that are happening next to you, things that you can really relate with, that is maybe one way of fighting against these horrible news happening everywhere in the world. And maybe that combination of having, of course, international news along with like local news, things that you care about, small things maybe, that may be one way of fighting news avoidance.
Yeah, I think so. I think, you know, you need to let people feel like they're part of something, not just like they, you know, if you just report about crime locally, you can end up feeling as a victim almost as a reader, you know.
No, I see what you mean. You don't want to impose these topics to the readers. Yeah, you want them to be part of an active community. Yeah,
exactly. And maybe you can, I mean, there are lots of very local new news sites in the States where they actually have the service of saying, for example, oh, the ambulating food bank is going to turn up here and here this week. This is where you can get free dental care for your kids. All that kind of stuff is also part of, you know, something that will make people come back to your news site. It's not just about news, you know. Journalism is a bigger concept than just updating people. Do you know what I mean?
That's very interesting, and I can easily connect that also to the topic of personalization, because one reason for news avoidance is also that you always see the same kind of stories, and actually if you connect local news creation and local information as well, and that you manage to push that content directly to the right audience dynamically, then you create that feeling of, okay, I enter a digital newspaper, I see content that I like to read, and I also see content that is closer to home in a way. So yeah, I mean, these are, for example, opportunities that AI can can unlock at publishers.
I mean, there was research came out last year from the UK. I'll find the source, but I can't remember it right now. And there were so many places where there is no longer a good enough local news publisher, and then the Facebook groups take over. Crazy. And of course, that is not exactly the same thing. And if you're letting that happen, you're really losing an opportunity. I mean, but people couldn't find the information they wanted on the local news site, so they start looking among their peers, which is fine, but it can also be like kind of a toxic experience if you end up in the wrong kind of group.
And so I'm sure they would love having somebody publishing content for them, right? So there is an untapped audience there that decided then to inform themselves differently.
I mean, to me, like journalism, it's, journalism is about people, and we are all participants. I mean, the journalists are participants, but the audience is also a participant and not like a passive consumer. I think we need to change how we look at that. And for that, I think automation can help. Also, AI can help also in terms of, maybe getting through all these big data sets or even unstructured data to surface information and stories, more investigative journalistic stories as well, and not just reactively reporting on what's happened, the big headline clickbait stuff.
No, absolutely.
That's my 5 pennies worth. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. And that brings me to a question that I had for later, but I want to ask it now. So imagine we can free up time from journalists by helping them in creating content that is, let's say, that they would be overqualified to write. How do you see them then them using that time? Do you believe like they should indeed invest more in investigative journalism or
you cannot give a generic answer here, because, and this is where this industry often, I think, it tends to go, ooh, I mean, I remember when the paywalls came out, okay? New York Times, they launched theirs in March 2011, and it was a metered paywall. And for the next couple of years, I met publishers from all over the world, and they were all like, oh, we're going to do what the New York Times did. But this is a big mistake. You have to look at your publication and what you're doing and who your audience are. And maybe you should do more investigative journalism. I mean, I would hope you'd like to do that, but there may be other things you should do. It depends on what your participants, your audience needs. And that's a whole discussion about user needs, which I also think it's really coming up now, starting to develop publishing based on meeting readers where they are, So I think it's very important for each publisher to figure out how you can be unique to your audience and valuable to your audience. And that might not be the same thing in rural Sweden as it is in Pittsburgh or whatever.
No, absolutely. And that also brings me to another question about creating value, being unique. So, I mean, we've been discussing these questions of, okay, will personalization replace editors in selecting the right content on the site? We've heard these stories about, will automated content replace journalists in creating content? We know that these are extremes that are not beneficial for anybody, right? So that's not where really we want to go. But how do you look at how to be unique while using more and more of automation, right? Because whether you want it or not, automation will bring some sort of common ground to everyone, right? So how to then create that uniqueness on top of AI?
I mean, I think it depends on what AI tool you're talking about. If you're talking about something that helps you dig up facts and surface things, then it's just an assistant, like you said before. If you talk about things like generative AI generating text, I think it's a different thing. And then you definitely don't want to let them, that technology is, I mean, in the early days, I say now, in December, when people were starting to media columnists were saying, oh, can you ChatGPT write a story about your role in journalism? And it was just full of platitudes and like very predictable stuff, because it was just looking through everything that had already been written. So you're not going to have anything unique. It's going to be quite vanilla, if you let an AI like that write texts. So I think from that point of view, you're not going to be unique. And it's about how you use the tech. It's not going to stop you being unique if you use it in the right way. Figure out the processes where it can help you build something unique, whether it's content or a new product or whatever it is. And stay away from it where it's just going to spew out rubbish, right? Sorry, but you know what I mean.
No, I see what you mean.
It's an active choice. It's not going to happen to you,
No, absolutely. And I feel like when asking these questions, I'm falling in the trap of looking at it black or white. And so you're explaining it very clearly.
Well,
it depends. You refuse to fall in that trap. It depends on the technology you're using. Of course, automated content journalism will create something vanilla, but then if you manage to create a unique experience on top of it, then you create uniqueness, and then you also have unique content next to it. So it's always about how you're using it, not what it usually does.
And I mean, we're taking the first steps now, like testing out generative AI in our internal processes. We would never let it just write text, I think. Well, not at this point. But it's there's been so many articles where you just ask ChatGPT a question and you get a clever answer. But that's one thing. But now we have to build it into like robust processes within the publishing industry. And that's something completely different. And it has to be done very carefully. And it has to be done under the control of people. That's super important.
Mm-hmm. So that's a very good transition to maybe our last question for today, talking about how do you see AI evolving in the future. So, I mean, we've been discussing about all these opportunities and they're still here. So that's definitely, let's say, one way to look at AI in the future. What we also know, and that's also based on a survey that OneIFRA published recently, we know that 75% of publishers reported that they see AI being a critical part of their success by 2024, while only 50% of them actually reported they're not using AI at the moment, right? So it's again connected to this feeling of there is a lot of curiosity. People know it's going to help, but they are still only a few actually using it. How do you see this balance evolving, and where do you think it will change first?
I think there's a threshold, because there is this perception that it's very difficult and that you need, and partly that's, I'm sure, true. But the tools are going to get more and more user-friendly. It's going to get easier and easier. I mean, just the fact that from when we started out, our platform was already built as a cloud-based thing. In 2016, that was not normal. And now you'd be crazy to do anything else. I mean, it's inconceivable. So I think it's the tech is evolving to become more user-friendly. And I think it's like with everything else in this industry, though, it's step by step, and you've got to dip your toe and see what happens. And I'm sure it will, as long as it helps the journalism. And I hope that's the way it's going. I think if publishers just focus on their product and their journalism, and try and find the best ways to use the tech, then it'll be another, a good thing. But it takes time to work out how you can best use it, I think. And I don't want to make any predictions about the future, really, because it's crazy how much has happened just since I started working here. So you don't know. The tech will get better. Or more advanced, at least. That's the only thing you can be sure of, I think.
Yeah, and it's also okay not to know, right? And
yes,
go with the flow. You don't always.
It's called life.
It's called life. I mean, adaptability is the one thing we all need, right? So
absolutely.
And also, I think you said something earlier in this conversation about the kind of people that you are interacting with when setting up these projects. And I think that's also a very good example of how AI is being more and more adopted and more seen as a solution rather than an exciting thing or a cool thing, you know? Which is already a very big change towards more adoption.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's been in over the last 5 years, I would say. It's just gone from it's not tech anymore, it's a problem solver. That's what it's about. Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's a great conclusion for today's conversation. It's not only tech, it's a problem solver. That's one sentence I'll remember from this one. So thank you, Cecilia, for the very interesting conversation.
Thanks, Thomas.
I don't know if you want to add anything as a conclusion or.
No, you should have prepared me. It's been great talking to you, and I'm just really excited to see what's going to happen next. It's getting super interesting, and I hope that just publishers stick to their guns and to their journalism. That's my main concern. The tech is there for you, not the other way around.
Great, thank you, Cecilia. That's a wrap on this episode of Value from AI. If you have any questions or if you want to leave a comment to us or to Cecilia, please follow us on Twitter at Froomle and stay tuned for the next episode. Thank you again, Cecilia.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.